Splicing can have its side effects. Here's a look at the McFarlane Toys DC Multiverse Batman from Earth-11. Bryce Wayne of Earth-11 harbored a deep hatred of the Atlanteans for the role in the death of her beloved Sylvester Kyle. In a quest to avenge Kyle, she spliced her DNA with that of an Atlantean, becoming a super-powered Dark Knight called the Drowned, capable of breathing and fighting underwater. Before we start talking about the Drowned, and might I just also say I love the name Drowned, that's such a clever name. The first thing obviously we're going to want to do is figure out how tall the figure stands. So I'm going to take it right to the makeshift cowl that she's made for herself. I'm going to stop the tape measure right around there. And according to the readouts, the Drowned stands 6.9 inches in height. We can quickly switch that over to centimeters, revealing that the figure stands 17.6 centimeters tall. Get going with those size comparisons. Here is the Batman Who Laughs, part of my hairy arm that came to us from the Merciless Wave. And speaking of the Merciless Wave, here is also the Batman with, of course, axes in hand. You can see that the Drowned, or Batman from Earth-11, fits in generally quite well with all the other figures that we've looked at so far. I feel like she's scaled appropriately to the Batman, and if anything, serves only more of a reminder to me that the Batman Who Laughs was a little bit too small. Probably could have been a lot taller than what he actually was. But we've talked enough about the Batman Who Laughs and his height problems. Instead, let's go back to the accessories that come included with the Drowned. For starters, you get yourself a nice collector quality card featuring the artwork of the Drowned up at the top. I love the different species of hands that are grabbing out from the dark depths of the ocean down below. And speaking of down below, nowhere listed, sadly, does it actually say the Drowned. Instead, it just says Batman Earth-11 Dark Knight's Metal. Flip it around to the back of the card. You've got on the back, source is Batman Drowned #1, Comics 2017. Real name is Bryce Wayne, as a change of pace. Height is 5'11", and weight is 160 pounds. Again, I like holding on to these cards. I put them immediately into sleeves after I finish these figure reviews. We'll put that to the side for the time being. She does also come included with the same DC Multiverse black stand that we've seen in other cases as well. Nothing has changed here. You can see the very faint DC logo down below and one single peg right at the top corner there. I will say that the figure does require a display stand. She has some real difficulty standing. We'll talk about that in a second. But yeah, we'll just move that to the side for the time being. And last and certainly not least, a talking point I wanted to mention. This rather long-looking trident that comes included with the figure. Looking at it closely, it has some pretty interesting sculpted features to it. I'm guessing this seems to be like gold plastic rather than plastic that's been painted gold. It doesn't look like anything's actually chipping on it. It makes me think that it's been molded in gold plastic. And for the most part, it looks pretty good. The downside, though, to it is the girth of handle that they've decided to give it. I think it's a lot bigger than it needed to be. Now, with that being said, that's only just my opinion, but I feel like perhaps some regulations may have stepped in. And maybe for this having to be a retail released figure, they had to make the handle thicker so it would be less likely to break. That's the only guess I have, because the handle really shouldn't be this thick. It does cause also problems when it comes to actually putting it into her hand. Let me just show you. Like this hand right here clearly isn't going to be designed to hold the trident. It's going to be holding nothing. But this hand right here is suited for holding the trident, and it just barely stays in her grip. Not only do you have to contend with the fact it's a larger looking handle even in the first place, but if you remove the trident, if you look at her hand, I wanted to say his hand, but if you look at her hand, I don't feel it's nearly enough curved in. So it's extremely flat right here. And when you then take the trident handle and you fit it into her grip, you can already see what the issue is. The grip just isn't deep enough, that it almost just seems to coast and rest on the edge of it. If it wasn't for the thumb and the three fingers, because I don't even feel like this finger is doing anything, if it wasn't for that, I think the trident wouldn't even stay in her hand in the first place. So when you have a really thick handle already, and then you put it in a grip so narrow like this, guaranteed it's going to give you problems when it comes to her holding an accessory. And the one thing that she does have, sadly, she just can't hold properly enough. And like I said, it just doesn't hold well enough. I'm going to put that to the side. Getting a closer look, though, now at the Drowned, or Batman from Earth-11, it's a good-looking figure. It lacks, of course, the same problem I generally have with the DC Multiverse figures. I like the sculpts, but sometimes I feel like the paint just could have been a lot more. When we look at the head sculpt, for example, I don't know why I'm getting this feeling, these vibes. When I'm looking at the head sculpt, it reminds me of Deacon from the 90s. Not, I wouldn't necessarily say smash hit, because it's far from that, but the movie Waterworld. It kind of reminds me of Deacon with that little eye, his was like glasses, but kind of reminds me of Deacon from Waterworld. Now, here's exactly what I was talking about. So you've got like the wrapped makeshift cowl that she's stretched across her face. And the paint is really good. Like, you've got the outlining there of the eye, so at least the eye stands out, at least the one eye, because obviously this one other eye is going to just be that goggle piece. But it really does lack a little bit of the paint. Like, the strapping that holds that goggle in place is just the same coloring as everything else. If anything, if they wanted to keep the same consistent color of that brown, make it just one shade darker, if anything. Another thing as well is if you look at the scarring here on the side of the face, I really like this. But unfortunately, without the additional much-needed color, if you look at it sort of from a distance, it sort of looks like the molding got damaged, as it doesn't even look like a scar. Maybe a little bit of additional black wash would have added just a little bit of enhanced experience, that scarring would have stood out just a little bit more. I mean, you could maybe even use the argument that if they put too much of a darker wash on this area of her face, it would have made the face look a little bit too busy in paint. So, okay, we can go ahead and go with that. But I really do feel like right there, especially, if they added just a little bit of a wash, just a slight bit, just a little bit of additional color, a little bit of TLC, I feel like that scar would have stood out a lot more than what it actually did. To its credit, I think it's a great looking head sculpt. I like the sheer disgust that the sculpting conveys here. Like, she's just totally sick of Atlanteans. She's totally done with them. And I get that. I read that on her face. Again, the head sculpt is really good, just needs a little bit of extra, just a little wash, just a little bit of a wash is all I would have asked for. If you spin around the back of the figure, you get this great, crazy looking hair. It kind of looks like an octopus. It looks like it has a life of its own, but it only really has just the black paint, nothing else on top of that. Again, when you're really looking at this figure, you kind of have to really step back and realize that these figures are retail release figures. And a lot of times, because of that, they don't put a lot of additional paint work to it. When you look at like the bodice, for example, here, and the kind of halter top here that she's wearing, like the bustier top there, this is all basically just kept to one single color. The forest green, and then of course they got the brown strapped across the front. But there's no other color. I really would have loved just to see a little bit of contrast added to this, where I feel like a lot of these details sort of then get lost because you don't see as much of them standing out. I mean, it looks good, but I just feel like a lot of paint probably was missed off this. It's not to the extreme of Bane. Bane is always sort of that figure I'm using to go back to and compare as an example of how good a figure could have been had it just had better paintwork done to it. I do like that little bat emblem there that she's wearing around her neck. It kind of resembles a little bit like a jack-o'-lantern. Like the sculpting on the jacket is really good. Like, all the stuff on here has a lot of textured layers to it. So for example, on the back here, that's all this ripped jacket. You can see the texture work that they actually incorporated into the plastic. I don't think necessarily here needed the coloring, but definitely on the front. Or if anything, if this is going to be a character that's spending so much of her life underwater, by all means, add a little bit of a sheen coat, like a semi-gloss sheen added over top of that, so that the outfit looked wet. Kind of similar to what they've done with the skirting here. This sort of seaweed skirting that she wears on the back here. It looks good from a sculpting standpoint, but yeah, you could admit they probably could have used just a little bit of extra color. Some highlights, some lowlights, just to give a little bit of depth to that sculpting. Because when you only really paint it in that one coloring of paint, that one coloring of green, it just feels like it's so flat, when really it shouldn't be the case at all. Then, of course, we look down at her lower legs. Now, this is the big issue I have with this figure, and something I mentioned at the beginning when we looked at the accessories. She has some real difficulty standing. A lot of it can be contributed to the fact, if you look at the heels are so close to the flat area of her foot that it doesn't seem to give you enough of a footprint for her to stay leveled flatting. Now, the problem also with this as well, if you look at the hinge joint, it's one of those old style hinges that McFarlane is using for all of his DC Multiverse figures. The problem with it is you can only go one way with the foot. You can only go either this way, back and forth, or if you want to get an ankle pivot, you literally have to rotate it this way, then rotate this back, and then you've got yourself an ankle pivot. But it has to be one or the other. Unfortunately, it can't be both. Because of that, it means that when it comes to standing this figure, without the use of a display stand, we'll say use your display stand if you have them readily available. Without the display stand, she does have some real nightmare standing. Like, I was lucky, if anything, that I could get her to balance at the beginning of this review. Like, even right there, I'm surprised I can get her to stand. And a lot of it just has to do with she has such a very narrow footprint. And because she almost even has more weight in her hair, it means that the figure is a little bit more top-heavy. And that really doesn't help with the type of feet that they decide to sculpt for her. Let's run through the posability here for the drowned. So her head rotates back and forth, but as you could probably guess it based on the sculpting of hair that they decided to go with, it really does just eliminate all possibilities for actually being able to move her head. If at the very least you could say it rocks back and forth this way, but rotating it all the way around, it's going to be hitting the side of her collar. And if you are trying to rotate it down, up and down this way, well, you can't do that because there's so much hair on the back. So about the only thing you can really pull off with the drowned is having her head rocking back and forth this way. Now, the torso is really interesting because this is all, again, encased in plastic. I've mentioned this before when we had a look at the DC Multiverse figures. Some of these figures have, like, ab crunches, but they're concealed underneath a layer of plastic. I mean, it keeps the joints and it keeps the look of the figure pretty seamless, but it does limit then what you can actually do with the figure. I feel almost in a case like this, I almost would have welcomed visible articulation points rather than hiding it underneath the plastic, where then as a result of it, you can barely do anything with the figure's torso. At least for her arms, you can hinge the arms out comfortably, easy, and at a 90-degree angle bend. You can bring the arms also all the way around, minus, of course, the hair. Just be careful of the hair. She has a swivel at the bicep, double hinge on the elbow. The glove, if you are curious, is part of the forearm, so you can't rotate that. However, you can rotate the hand all the way around, and you also can hinge it back and forth. Then for the legs, because the skirting that they gave her, and I'm going to just call it skirting for the time being, this seaweed slime that's got draping down here, because of the nature of the material that they use, it's softer plastic, and because there's enough of a spacing around it, you can still get the figure's legs to split. I don't know if you would necessarily display the figure like this, but it's just to show you for this review. You can bring the legs forward and back comfortably, no problems whatsoever. Can't really necessarily swivel the figure. I mean, she does have the ratchet joint on the inside, as we've seen with all the other cases of DC Multiverse figures, but she doesn't seem to be able to rotate anywhere at the top of the thigh. She does have a double hinge on the knee. That's good. And then again, we've already talked about the feet, but we'll mention it quickly already. The feet rotate all the way around this way, depending on which placement you've got the hinge joint. Okay, so again, like, see the joint is facing the sideways there? Means you can ankle pivot this way. But if you want to have the feet go forward, then you have to rotate it so it's going this way. See what I mean? There's a little slice right there that allows then the foot to go back and forth this way. Unfortunately, you can't do both. And last, and certainly not least, she has a peg going through her toes. So you can give her a little bit of toe articulation, but it's sort of misleading because not all the toe goes along with it. What's left behind is sort of just a stump. It just kind of looks a little awkward. Thank goodness again, though, she does have peg holes on the undersides of her feet, because I feel like a case like this, she looks great, but she does have some real trouble standing. So for that, I'm going to go ahead and take the display stand, put it on her feet the way it should be, and then you've got yourself the drowned figure. Now, again, the problem is with getting her to properly hold the Trident, it's just more than luck than anything else to get her to properly hold it, because the size of the handle has to be as thick as it is, and the grip just isn't nearly accommodating for it. Like I said, she just barely holds on to it, and that's a real shame. The drowned is a good-looking figure by design, but by design it also means there's limitations with what you can actually do with the figure. The head sculpt looks fantastic, but due to the height of the collar and the sculpting of the hair, it means that the articulation in the head is almost null and void. Yeah, you can rock it back and forth, but you can't really move the head up and down, nor can you rotate it past the point of the collar, which is a bit of a shame. The body is seamless, so it looks cosmetically great, but you can't really do anything with the torso. Really, all the articulation on this figure is only just in the arms and just in the legs, with the legs being a real problem when it comes to the ankles. This is a figure as well, I feel, again, I hate to sound like a broken record, but it really needed a lot of additional paint. It looks great, the colors they chose, but it really needs that rich depth that can only come with adding a darker wash over top of the plastic. Especially when it comes to the seaweed skirting that she has, would have looked so much better had they only put a darker coat of paint, just washed over top of it. And then, of course, we can talk a little bit about the Trident, next to almost impossible for her to hold. If anything, you can kind of get the handle slightly higher to the points of the Trident. If you get that around her grip, she holds it a lot better than normal. But still, the size, the girth of that handle means that she really has some true difficulty holding it in place. I don't know why specifically it had to be as thick as it is. Again, it may have something to do with regulations and maybe a thinner handle. They tried it because obviously if you look at the back of the packaging, she should have a lot thinner of a Trident than what she did. Maybe again, they Trident. That doesn't sound too good. If they tried it, maybe they found that the thinner handle was more susceptible to breaking. And maybe the real reason why they had to make it thicker than what it was. It just kind of looks awkward and it doesn't sit as well in her hand as I would hope. But it's a good looking figure despite slight shortcomings. Have you picked up this figure for yourself? If so, let me know down below in the comment section what you guys think of Batman Earth-11 or The Drowned. If you guys are also new to this channel and enjoying all the content you're seeing, be sure to hit the subscribe button down below and turn the bell notification on. Be also sure to come back to this channel Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and yes, sometimes the weekends as well. So basically almost every day we're doing videos on this channel, 12 p.m., not 12 a.m., 12 p.m. and 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. We're also going to be having a look at some more McFarlane Toys DC Multiverse figures. So if this is the kind of thing that you guys dig, make sure you keep your peepers peeled to this channel during those times and days that I mentioned. So basically like every day, there's definitely going to be a lot more DC Multiverse figure reviews coming your way. And as always, guys, thanks for watching. I'll see you guys next time.